Now, Benita Stoney, you were reared in a castle
I
as a
was.
child.
Yes. Yeah.
How old is this castle?
Not that old. It was started in 1867. We're talking about Rosturk Castle.
Yeah.
It was started by Colonel Vaughan, who was an English Catholic who came over here after the famine and bought up the encumbered estates. It was part of the O'Donnell estate, I think, after the famine, and he wanted to do something for Irish Catholics. And he originally started in Glen Heather in Mulranney. That was where he lived for several years. When he visited, he wasn't here all the time. But then in 1867, he proposed building Rosturk Castle and laid the foundation stone on a greenfield site in September 1867. And it was supposed to be built in imitation of a castle in Herefordshire, which is where his family came from. They were a very famous English Roman Catholic family. I think of their 13 children, 11 went into the church.
Oh.
5 nuns and 6 priests. And there were several bishops, and the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Vaughan, was one of his sons. But anyway, his Irish venture didn't work out for him.
But he actually finished it off. He built it. He did.
He built half of what's there now. And my great-grandfather, Benita Stoney, enlarged it in 1878. Benita Stoney was born in Roscommon at Knockadoo, which is near Boyle. And then sometime around 1850, I think, he came to live at Rossavera, between Newport and Mulranney. And obviously fell in love with, as a child, he fell in love with the place. He was here let me start again. Age 6, he was sent off by Coney Carr to Exeter to school. I don't know whether anyone went with him or not. The memoir that talks about it doesn't mention anybody else, but the idea of sending a 6-year-old child off to another country, anyway, that's what happened. And he came back when he was 9, I think, and I think that's when he came back by the barges on the canal, and he was here between 9 and 13, and I think that was when he sort of fell in love with the place and made his friends. And then he was sent off to school again for about another year, and came home at about 15, and then went to Australia with an uncle. And he was very very ambitious and a boy in a hurry, and he couldn't make money fast enough in Australia, even though he went to Ballarat to the goldfields, and that didn't do. So he went down to the port in Melbourne, I think it was, and there were 2 ships, and one ship was going to San Francisco and one ship was going to Calcutta, and he tossed a coin and it came up for Calcutta. So he boarded the Royal Charlie, and this would be, I think it was 1859, I think, and sailed to Calcutta and arrived in Calcutta with £10 in his pocket. As I say, aged about 15, and got a job surveying railways in the Ganges Delta, and worked in India for about the next 17 years, by which time he was a contractor, and he was building railways, and then he went into canals in Orissa and built canals there, and he had this kind of freelance maverick career. He had a brother who was a government engineer, that was Butler Stoney, and he was involved in building an absolutely enormous dam on the Ganges, but I can't remember the names off the top of my head. But I think there were 4 or 5 Stoney cousins who were engineers in India, including the man who was the grandfather of Alan Turing, the maths genius during the Second World War. There's a very, very strong engineering bent that runs through the whole family. It's bypassed me, but others have still got it.
You've got other talents.
Anyway, so he came back in 1873, I think it was, Vesey.
And he was wealthy then, he was obviously.
Yes, and
very
he
wealthy.
made enough money to buy Rosturk, which was by this stage was up for sale. The nearly finished castle and thousands of acres, mostly of bog and mountain, and the islands, and I think it was 7,000 or 8,000
Like
acres.
7,000 someplace, yeah.
And he got married and started to enlarge the house, and he virtually sort of doubled the house in size.
And was his wife local or British or?
No, well, she had connections in County Meath, but mainly her family lived in the Isle of Wight, and they were Plymouth Brethren, which was a very dry and Puritan sect, really. They've been described as the milk of human the cream of human kindness gone sour. And she was very depressive, I think, and obviously didn't take to life here very, very well, because Vesey he settled down and he took part in establishment life, and he was on the grand jury and very much involved in the life of the county. She couldn't have any children, and he wanted to found a dynasty, and this was a great source of stress.
And he stopped his building industry then, his railways, and did he retire from that? Or
Yes,
he gave it up or sold it
gave
up?
it up. He'd given it up, yeah. And he was here, he lived here, he was always here, he wasn't an absentee, and he was very critical of men who were.
And had he the land rented out to tenants and all?
He did.
The same as the rest of them?
Yes,
same as everybody,
Yes, same as everybody. And in fact, what he'd done was he bought the place in the 1870s and actually bought himself a sort of front row seat in the land war.
Okay.
And there was no end of trouble, but I can't go into that because I don't know enough about it. I haven't got it completely straight. But he was very active, and if you read the accounts in the newspapers, I don't think he's nearly as bad as he was painted, but they said terrible things. But I think it was not because of him, it was because of what he represented.
That happened, yeah.
I hope, anyway.
Were there many tenants on the estate now, in this area?
Yeah, there were. I don't know, maybe 60 or 70 possibly, I would think. But I don't take that for
yeah, well, it's not a huge amount really. Like, it's not. Of course, he only had 7,000 acres.
Yeah, but a lot of it was mountain.
Up the mountain.
Yeah.
Down with the shore, I suppose. And,
yeah. Well, there were tenants on some of the islands, the people living out there.
Yeah. That's probably the best land, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was.
Yes. We consider the difference when you look at the islands, they're green and the rest is mountainous and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
So anyway, his wife died by suicide in the early 1890s. And then he married again.
And did she commit suicide here or?
No, that was in England.
She was in England, yeah.
She'd been sent off to a medical boarding house in Eastbourne. So his second wife was a truel from Clonmamon outside Wicklow. And that was a very happy marriage. And they had 2 sons. But because they were both elderly parents, I think he was 57 and she was in her late 30s, maybe 40, when she had him. They sort of promised their firstborn son to God and called him Sam, and he was going to go into the church. And he was the, he was the golden boy, and he was born in 1898, I think. And then quite a lot later, maybe 3 or 5 years later, they had another son, Robert. And Sam was old enough in 1917. He finished up at school and he had a place at Oxford, but he went into the Irish Guards and had a few months training in the Irish Guards, and then went off to Flanders. And he was in France for a couple of weeks, and then he went up to the front and into action and was killed. He lasted less than 12 hours.
Awful waste.
Yes, yeah.
Across the board.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of millions, but in fact this year was the 100th anniversary of his death, and I've always said I wanted to go and put my finger in his name on the wall at Tyne-Cot, because his body was never found. This was during the Third Battle of Ypres, the Battle of Passchendaele, which was the bloodiest, the most horrible possible you could possibly imagine. The place was a terrible place, and it had been fought backwards and forwards over for 3 years, and it was a soup of mud and bodies. So anyway, his name is on the wall.
The name is on the wall.
Yeah. And I went and did this in October with a cousin, and we took part in the ceremony at the Menin Gate the night before.
Oh, that was nice.
It was.
100 years later.
100 years yes, and then to the very morning, we were able to. We got hold of the report that his commanding officer had written, very sort of bald and laconic, but we were able to follow his progress through the fields and across the countryside. I mean, it's all restored and
right.
It's all fields and
you wouldn't see anything,
farms have been built up, but you could the names are still there and in the same places. So we did that, and I took a bit of sand from Rosturk, from the boathouse, and we sprinkled it into a field of leeks, as close as we sort of reckoned we were to where he'd been killed.
Did you find it emotional?
Very, yeah.
Very, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you shed a tear?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Because he was a very, very important part of the family pantheon, even though he wasn't there. He'd left a very big hole, because obviously he'd been very important to his parents, and then his mother had passed it on to her grandchildren when they arrived. So that he was an important person who was missing. Because Sam was the first son, and then the second son, Robert, was too young to
go to war.
And he married Fania Nugent from County Cavan, and they had 6 children. The eldest one, Oliver, was my father, and he inherited Rosturk very early in his life, because Robert signed up for the RNVR, the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve. He was about 40, I think, and he was sent to West Africa. And I was speaking to somebody recently who'd heard that Robert had said to this local friend, "I won't come back." And then somebody else I was speaking to had been there the night before he left, and she said it was like a wake. And he was playing soccer, I think, or playing football, and got a bruise and died of osteomyelitis. Is that right?
Osteomyelitis,
Yeah. Just sort of
bone infection, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, common common that time.
Yeah,
And no treatment.
and there was no penicillin. It was May 1944, but there was no penicillin apparently because it was being kept back for D-Day.
Yeah. And he died out there. Yeah?
And he died he's buried in Freetown. And it's a War Graves Commission. It's beautifully kept. I've seen photographs of it, and it's all immaculate. And funnily enough, I was sitting next to somebody in a concert in Westport who works for the graves, for the commission. And I said, "Oh, my grandfather's buried in Freetown." And she said, "Oh, we've just spent £200,000 mending the seawall, repairing the seawall outside the graveyard." And I thought, well, that's actually very appropriate because that's what was happening at Rosturk all the time. The seawall was repaired.
It gets pounded out there,
Yes,
doesn't it? It does, yeah. But have you any ambition to go out to the Freetown?
No.
Too far.
No.
So, after him?
So after him, my father, Oliver, inherited the place when he was 16.
So what relation was he of him? His brother?
Son.
So, his son?
Yeah.
Okay.
Robert's son, Oliver.
Oliver.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what year was that about?
1944.
44.
Yeah.
So he took it over then?
Yes, he did.
He live here?
Well, he was in the Navy, so he wasn't living here. But his mother was living here. And then when he got married, when he was ashore, we lived with him. But when he went to sea, or when he was posted abroad for a couple of years at a time, he left my mother and us at Rosturk.
And when he came home, where did you live?
In England, in rented.
Oh, in England. Okay,
in England.
Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah. So until I was about 7 rather, and then my mother died as a result of a couple of riding accidents. And at the same time, my father was told that he was too deaf to ever have a command at sea because he'd been a gunnery officer.
Right.
And they didn't wear any muffs or anything on their ears.
No such thing.
No, and they just banged away at the guns until their eardrums started to bleed.
Yeah.
So, because he couldn't go to sea, he didn't want a shore job. He wanted to enjoy Rosturk, which he'd never been able to because he'd been working all the time. So he came out of the Navy, and he married again, and we came back to live, all of us, at Rosturk in 1963. And he ran it as a guest house, and he had battery chickens, and he had the farm. But it was all fairly chaotic, and it was before the EU. And eventually it all sort of got too much for him, and he sold up in... I think we moved out in 76, and I think he sold in 78, but about then.
And was it empty for that 2 years it was?
No, there was coming and going, and people rented it, and
Off ye.
Yeah.
And then the Healy's bought it.
And then it was bought.
Dr. Healy bought it.
Dr. Healy, yeah.
Famous cancer man back in the 70s and 60s, and used to come to Castlebar.
Yes.
To a clinic in Castlebar,
yes.
where I met him once or twice myself. But what was the house like then? What's your memory of the house when you lived here? Was it well kept and maintained and furnished and all that?
No, I hate the sound of rain on the roof. I can't bear a drip, the sound of a drip in the house, because there was always the house. The roof was flat, was lead, and the strips of lead which were rolled around each other, and if people had walked on them, they got flattened and they leaked. So there were leaks all over the place. I mean, I honestly, I don't know. I was a child. It was a wonderful place for children. I think it was probably a nightmare for grown-ups.
And you had a lot of wood. Was the wood around here at the time? Was it wooded area?
Yes, yes.
And you were allowed up through the woods and...
Oh, good. We had terrific freedom, yeah. There's a letter that my mother wrote when I was 6 and Robert was 4, And you've got Rosturk on the shore, and then you've got the islands in front of you, and the tide goes in and out. And Moynish must be, I don't know, half a mile away. And she describes going off to church, and she said something like, "As I went, two little figures Benita and Robert had decided to take themselves off to Moynish, and there were these two little figures scampering off across the dazzling sand. And she just let us go. I mean, there was somebody in the house minding us, but she didn't mind that we went off for half a mile. I was 6 and he was 4, and the tide coming. She said, "It's quite all right. Benita knows about the tides."
I was going to say that you were used to it.
Yes,
you were used to it. Yeah. You grew up with it, yeah.
Yes, so we were allowed a lot of rain. Yeah.
And was there antique furniture in it now or anything like that? There are big pictures, how you imagine these houses.
Yeah, there were. Yes.
And were there portraits of owners and?
There were Stoney portraits, yes, most of which disappeared in the auction, so I don't know what's happened to them.
They're going out into the big wide world out there, are they?
Yeah. But there was old Veazey with a great sort of walrus moustache and a red face.
Mm. And there was a garden to it, was there, attached to it?
There was a big walled garden, yes.
Mm. All this is still there, I assume, the walled garden. And
it's mostly there. I think
there.
part of the garden wall's fallen down. I think it's blown down. But it had everything. There was a well at the top, and there were fruit trees. There were apple trees, and then espaliered apple trees and pear trees. And my mother put in a couple of figs, and there were black currants and gooseberries. And when she came in the 1950s, Curly Ginley had died. He'd been a gardener there for about half a century, I think. I think he must have started as a gardener's boy, aged about 6. And then he died, and nothing much happened then. And then my mother came along, and she was a very good gardener, and got the thing going, and got the vegetables going.
And were there staff in the house? Housekeepers?
Yes.
In your time?
Not a housekeeper in my time. When Veazey was there, they had Edward Johnson, who came from somewhere. Where did Edward come from? From somewhere near Newport, and he'd started as a footman, and he stayed, and he ended up as butler. And I think it's he and his wife Maggie kept the place running. They were fantastic people. And Maggie died in the 1930s, and Edward Johnson died in 1948, I think. And then after that, there'd always be girls in the house cleaning and.
You can remember names.
Well, there was the Ginleys. There was, the Ginleys.
A lot of time gone by.
Lucy MacDonald, who looked after us. She was from Cavan, County Cavan.
Where did you go to school?
There was Maggie Jane McLaughlin, who was from Rosturk. And she was wonderful. And Bridgie Garvey used to come in, and Philomena Calvi. And the Canes, Rose and Kathleen Kane. They're the ones that spring to mind.
Yeah. Now, Benita, where did you go to school?
I was sent off to school in England.
In England, yeah. That was what was done that time, was it? More or less.
Yeah.
You would be considered to be a big house, would you, at the time?
Well, I suppose so.
When they talk about big houses in Ireland at the time, yeah. And did you feel anything special about, or different about coming from a big house? Or just there with it?
It's just there. It was
Just there. Yeah.
how it was.
And did you play with the locals? Were you allowed to play with them? This stuff can be kind of sensitive, but it happened,
Yeah.
Whatever, yeah. So you played with the local kids around here and all that, yeah. And was there any resentment at that time towards?
Well, not that I know of.
Well,
But I
you know.
don't know that people would have said anything to my face.
Well,
I've never ever had a whiff of it.
well, that was nice, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, people get over it. I mean, there was nothing to get a whiff about it, or that you were fairly good to the local tree, apparently.
So I believe.
There you believe, yeah. I often wondered that how people, at the time, because there was a huge structure in the country at that time, with different social groups, and from peasants to regal nearly, you know. So, how people coped with all these things. But I suppose they just got on with it like everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you go to secondary school in England as well then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, when I say we were homeschooled until it was, well, my brothers went to prep school. They went to Headford,
Yeah, okay.
and I was at home until I was 12, and then I went to secondary school in England.
And which school was that at?
That was Downhouse in Berkshire.
Berkshire. Did you enjoy it there?
No, hated it. I wanted to be here.
You want to be back in Mulranney or
Yeah.
Rosturk. What's your address here? Is it Newport or Mulranney?
Well, the postal address was Rosturk Westport,
Westport.
but now it's Rosturk Mulranney.
Mulranney, okay, yeah. And you've done a bit of art. You do art,
I
yeah.
do.
You
Yes,
do art.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You have a specialty?
Yes, I'm a portrait painter.
Portrait.
Yeah.
Busy? Yeah.
Very busy, thank goodness. Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
Must indicate something. And you're involved with local art. We see it. You go to all the art exhibitions
Oh,
around
yes,
there.
yes,
Yeah.
I do, yes.
Do you exhibit much locally yourself?
Well, I have something in the Custom House Studios at the moment. There's a Christmas show there. They have a show that everybody who's worked there during the year, and I go there every week to use the print studio. The printmaking is a kind of it's a release from the tensions of portrait painting. Portrait painting gets very serious.
Does it?
Yeah, yeah.
From what point of view? Expectations?
Expectations, and it's very demanding, and you want to get it right, and you have to sort of concentrate on the personality. And I do. It's a very serious business.
And who judges what's right?
Well, there was one child I painted, and his mother said, "Oh, when I see him in the picture, I want to hug him." And I thought, "Yes, I've got it right. That's okay."
And what do you think of this part of the world now?
I can't imagine living anywhere else.
Have you ever lived anyplace else as an adult?
Yeah, I lived in England for 10 years.
No, okay,
Yeah.
right. Bit different, is it?
Oh, very different. Yes.
Do you live in the city or in the country in England?
I was living in a village. Yeah.
Some of the English villages can be very nice, can't they? Yeah?
Oh, they're very pretty.
They're pretty, yeah.
Yeah.
They have a great pub life there as well, don't they? Or they used to have, anyway.
They did. And I went into the Red Lion or whatever it was early on when I was in there, and I was kind of sitting, having a quiet drink in a corner, and there were two people in there. One of them said to the other, "And how many racehorses do you have in training?" And I thought, no, this isn't for me.
Did you have horses down here when you were...
We did at Rosturk, yes.
The Rosturk,
Yes,
yeah.
we did pony trekking.
Did you?
Yeah, and that was lovely because you could go out on the sand, and it's a marvellous place to do it.
And did you... I assumed you owned some of the mountain up on the
Yeah.
right-hand side of the road going to Mulranney, yeah?
Yeah.
Would you ever bring them up there? Or was it mostly
Yeah,
down...
we did, yes, but I mean but not actually on the mountain itself. It wasn't suitable for horses, but you could take them up the tracks.
Up the tracks?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
there's plenty of tracks up there,
Oh
aren't
yeah,
there? They're lovely
again,
tracks.
it was great. And for the less experienced people, you could take them up on the mountain, because it wasn't as, you didn't need to be in charge of the horses in quite the same way as you did on the sand.
There was a great lot of development in the rocks underneath the house, wasn't there? They kind of sheds dug into the rocks and changing rooms and...
Yes, there's a boathouse and changing rooms, and I think there was a generator or something down there once upon a time. But it was only ever kind of empty and rusty that I can remember.
That you can remember it, yeah. But I've seen that they're still intact down there, aren't they? More or less.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. And there was a pier, but I mean, it wasn't really suitable for anything more than sort of summertime sailing. If you wanted to moor a boat, you could moor a boat in deep water off Moynish, and that was sheltered, and that was okay. Or you could come round here to Roy Pier.
And did you have a boat yourselves?
We did.
You did?
Yes. Yes.
It was
She was absolutely beautiful. She was called Stella Maris, and she'd been built by a Berry, I think in Newport.
Berry.
Yeah. And I always marvelled because she was beautiful. She was sat like a bird on the water, but the man who built her couldn't read or write.
But that made no difference to
No,
the boat, did it?
no,
No.
no.
And was there an engine in it, or was it
No, it was a
sailing boat? Yeah. And where did it end up? You'd ever heard?
It ended up in Westport.
In Westport. Yeah. So you've had a good life down here,
It was yes, it was great.
and it's getting
Wonderful
better.
place
It's
to
getting better, is it? You're down in a different place now, aren't you? In
not
Roy,
very
yeah?
far away.
You're in a beautiful place here as well. You're picking all the good spots.
Yes.
Well done.